Welcome to Counsel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield.
Hello, I'm Alex Novarese, the director at Byfield, and I'm here with Oliver Attinger, the editor and founder of Non-Billable, the fast-growing online business of law publication that has carved out a distinctive space, looking at the key trends shaping the legal industry. Oliver, thanks for joining us.
That's some introduction, thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've got the full posh voice on, my mother would barely recognise me. So by way of context, this is the first of a regular series of interviews we're planning to do with influential figures in the business and legal media. I used to work in the legal media a long time ago. I've been out of the game for 5 years, and I came back to peek over the fence and see what was going on. Found things very different.
We might get into this, but you were a bit of an OG, weren't you? In my books, at least, Alex. I used to read your coverage back in the day. So yes, I can.
Bless you. I'm extremely emotionally needy, so I'll probably unpack that at length a little later on. But yeah, looking back at the media, it's changed a lot. It's bigger and it's probably more disparate. It's slightly more sprawling. It's got little bits of the ecosystem, and the emergence of non-billable was one of the aspects of that interested me, even though you're a relatively small outfit already having quite a lot of impact.
Yeah, interesting you say that, because it feels to me like it hasn't changed all that much, really. My first, I was a former lawyer, so my first kind of engagement with any legal media was probably, way back when you were sort of looking at training contracts and the like. So this would have been 2006-07 or something like that. And the truth is, the same core set of titles are really the same ones that are around today, I would say.
Well, you mentioned your background. Let's do the backstory first. So you were a lawyer at Ashurst from memory. Talk a little bit about that, and we'll try and explore the route that took you to the glorious mountains of legal journalism.
Yeah. So I started my career as a lawyer. Yes. So this was, I remember, this was sort of just as the financial crisis was kind of at its zenith. You will remember those days well. Fortunately, I think managed to secure a training contract just before the kind of worst of it. But anyway, training contract started in 2010, and that was at Ashurst. And then I spent a full sort of nearly 7 years at Ashurst.
Good stint.
Yeah, good stint. And I qualified into the finance department at Ashurst, but I was doing structured finance and derivatives, so quite a sort of niche area. But if you know your sort of city law game, which you do, Alex, Ashurst has always been pretty strong in that area. And back then, it definitely had one of the city's top practices within kind of derivatives and structured finance. So it was a great place to be, and there were some really smart people that I worked with there, and some of the work that we did was sort of top notch, to be honest. And the clients that we were working with spent nearly a year on secondment at Citibank over in Canary Wharf, and that was on the trading floor. So yeah, that was a fantastic experience, and actually one that I always say to any lawyers, go and spend some time in house if you can, whether that is on secondment or moving a bit of a career change and going in house. I think it's super valuable.
Okay, so you decided that law, you gave it a good stint. It wasn't like you flamed out, but you decided law wasn't quite for you. What was the process there, and tell us about your next step?
Yeah, well, like I said, I really enjoyed my time for sure, and I felt that I could see the path very sort of clearly ahead of me, right? And that was kind of quite satisfying and quite you saw that path and you knew what was ahead, put it that way. But for me personally, I always just had some itches that I knew I needed to scratch doing some other things, really. Law is a fantastic career. Obviously, you're working with the sort of brightest people I think you will ever work with, almost. But equally, it's very sort of highly structured, right? So when you look ahead, you might look at partnership and the like, but with a pretty high level of certainty where you're going to end up. If you just sort of show up for the next 10, 15 years, where you're going to be.
Structured, predictable, highly paid. Sounds awful. You must have wanted to get straight out of that.
I have to say, like that was kind of the aspect that I felt a little bit uncomfortable about. I'm not going to lie. So you know, I did my time in legal, but yeah, towards the end, I just knew that I wanted to go and sort of test myself in some other areas. So that's what I did, and yeah, took the decision to leave Ashurst, and at that point, I dived straight into building a digital media business in a different sector to law. But I'm sure if you
cycling based, wasn't it? From
this exactly, yeah. So we actually
talk about. I want to hear about that. I think that's part of your story.
Yeah. So at the time, I had sort of an interest in cycling, let's say, but I wasn't a sort of die-hard cycling fan. But I felt that there could be an opportunity to build something interesting within that space because it was quite sort of old school, the media landscape and things. So the plan, the opportunity, as I saw it, was to build a kind of, it was a social media publishing business essentially. So the model is that you build an audience on social, and then you monetize it, right? And there are various ways that you can monetize that, either through a conventional kind of news websites, things like branded content. You could sell the audience things like actual physical products, like merchandise and that type of thing. And if you cast your mind back to that era, 2017, 2018, this was kind of peak Facebook. Okay, so if you knew what you were doing, you could build an audience on those platforms pretty swiftly. Okay, and then it turned out that those people that were following your page, your account on Instagram, were actually real people. So yeah, who knew exactly? Maybe not so clear these days, right? But anyway, back then, so you could do things like build an audience. You could then build a simple website, start writing some news articles, put the articles out on those channels, and believe it or not, they would actually drive traffic to your website. And this was super sort of exciting, right? Because suddenly you're seeing in real time something that is actually working and people are kind of engaging with what you're doing.
You were doing this on your own, or you were part of a business?
No, I did it on my own. So by the time I'd left Ashurst, I'd already I already had a small following at that point just on Facebook. So I was just building out this page basically on the side, and within probably 6 months, if I remember, the page itself probably had nearly it was probably about 70,000-80,000 followers. And then we were building out, or I was building out on Instagram at the time as well. But that initial phase was literally just sort of audience building. So you are spending, almost all day, every day doing that, right? And at the time, most of it was kind of user-generated content. Okay, so again, this was kind of like the sort of Wild West days of social media, if you remember. So you could, mostly with permission, kind of take folks' videos that they post on Facebook and Instagram and just kind of share them, repost them on your platform. And if you did that consistently enough at a high enough volume, the people would just start following your page, your audience would grow, and that was the play really.
Okay, so talk us through how that moves forward, and then we'll start to get to the launch of Non-Billable itself.
One of my clients, when I was had my agency, was an insurance business who was operating in the space, and just sort of mid-pandemic, really, I joined up with him because we both thought that there was a really exciting opportunity to build that business, given the way that kind of cycling and outdoor sports was absolutely booming at the time. So that's what I did. I sort of wound down the agency, and I thought, hey, this is actually a bigger, more exciting opportunity. So I joined him to build that business out. And this was it was an insurtech business, so it had the technology platform. It was its own. It did everything end to end. So it was a full stack insurance company. So it distributed the policies as well as underwriting the insurance. So it had an insurance vehicle in Guernsey, and everything about it was its own, and it was super cool. What a fantastic experience that was, kind of coming on board, sort of high growth, period for the company, and then also just getting under the hood of how the kind of insurance world works, like coming up to the city, meeting with other underwriters and all that sort of. But the bigger opportunity that I saw, just kind of using some of my experience up to that point, was coming back to the legal world. And again, part of it was because the space has changed so much in the last 10 years. From when I was left practice at the start of 2017 to what was this sort of 2-3 years ago or whatever, the market had really transformed. You had the US firms had just really disrupted the market in London to a much bigger degree than they had done a decade ago. And then this was obviously just the start of the Gen AI boom. So again, that just made the whole space so much more sort of interesting and dynamic. And for me, I always thought that there was an opportunity to offer something that felt a little bit sort of new and modern and differentiated within the legal media space. And this was I felt at that point that I just had the perfect kind of skill set to give that a crack, really.
And how did it start at those initial points?
Yeah, so look, whenever you're building sort of anything, it's just about doing. You've got to walk before you can run, right? And the most important thing is that you try, as kind of cost effectively and as swiftly as possible. You need to kind of validate your idea, whatever it is. So what I did was I started writing a newsletter, and I was just doing that on the side. I did that 3 times a week, and the premise of the newsletter was, hey, you know what? I'm going to give people what I would really have appreciated when I was practicing, and that was a 3 times a week newsletter that just rounded up the most important legal and business stories that you needed to know about, really to kind of stay on top of the market. So that's what I did. And it was basically just like a kind of a digest, if you like, or a roundup of the biggest stories that they needed to know about. And yeah, I just kept working on that. And
24, is it roughly timeline?
This would have been the end of 2023.
Yeah.
So there's a few hacks you can do to kind of get the thing moving. But really, the tell is can you get it going sort of organically, right? And with a newsletter, it's quite difficult, right? Because there's no natural kind of discoverability mechanic behind a newsletter. People don't really share newsletters particularly, do they? So it's quite difficult. So you need to find some ways to, first of all, get your initial, whatever it is, few hundred subscribers. And then as long as you keep doing it and people like it, then it just sort of grows over time.
So you launch in January 25 as a sort of the fully blown media brand?
I think it was sort of March or April, probably 2025, when we started posting kind of news articles on the site. At this point, this was still a kind of side hustle for me, right? So it wasn't until end of summer 2025 that I actually went full time on it, and our first kind of month of trading was August, I think, 2025. So by that point, we had a kind of simple news website, we had a pretty decent LinkedIn community, we had the newsletter, and that was the kind of platform ready to go. Okay, right, let's do this, basically.
Okay, so that launch is, we'll get back to the dynamics of that a little bit, but you mentioned before what you were trying to achieve. What's the mission statement? What do you see as the distinctive pitch for Non-Billable?
For me, I think it's about just providing, I always think about it in terms of kind of serious professional coverage that feels accessible. And one of the things I wanted when I was practicing was I wanted people, because you need to remember, as I said, that lawyers are totally obsessed by the big law market, the business of big law, in the same way that kind of journalists often are, including myself. So you need to kind of have that layer of kind of bigger picture, why it matters in the content, in the stories, the coverage that you give the audience. So I think that is always going to be a super important part of what we do. Okay, so if we're
the significance,
right? If we're covering a kind of lateral partner move, it by itself, okay, fine. But most of the folks are like, well, why is that important? Well, we're only covering it because it is important, and we're going to tell you a little bit about why it's important. So it's just about doing that, but equally, kind of meeting your audience where they are, isn't it? So, understanding that you're not trying to kind of teach them how to suck eggs, but they are sort of sophisticated, and there's a bit of an art to that, and that's the kind of approach we try to take.
So the podcasts are interesting. I think it seems to speak to how you approach what you're doing. And I think it was the first way I interacted with the brand before I joined Byfield. What's the way that you're approaching those interviews? How do you see what you're trying to tease out from them?
Look, I think for me, more than anything, it's just about having an interesting business conversation with someone who is, mainly someone who is leading a law firm. That is what interests me. That's what I get most excited about, that's fundamentally it. The things. It's about kind of business strategy, how they think about competitors, how they think about the big trends sort of shaping the market, whether it's kind of external capital investing in law firms, how they think about kind of compensation models and the way that the partnership model is being kind of disrupted with non-equity tiers and the like. So it's those things, and those are the kind of conversations which are just, for me, that it's so obvious that you would be having a conversation with someone like that about that, right? You can engage. It's so much more interesting when you're able to talk about someone's business and how they think about things, basically.
Yeah, I mean, listening to your interviews, I think what comes across is that you don't necessarily approach them as a trained journalist. I mean, as a compliment. I think there's a kind of intellectual curiosity or a sense of trying to get an engagement with the people that you're talking to. I mean, inevitably, if you go over length, sometimes they hold better than others, but it always feels that there's an attempt to kind of reach a common ground or get something out.
Yeah, maybe that's an advantage, Alex, to be honest, because obviously I'm not a journalist by background. So you just sort of ask the question that's kind of most interesting to you, basically. It's kind of interesting because obviously, understandably, most lawyers, senior lawyers in law firms are it's quite a conservative space still, right? They've got clients that they need to make sure still trust them, and they can't be seen as some sort of swashbuckling, risk-taking institution, right? Obviously. So you need to kind of also, like I said, they have to be able to trust you, right? That you're a safe pair of hands to have this interview with them. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. So it's about kind of striking that balance. But for me personally, my sort of pitch to any law firm leader who's thinking about doing a podcast, whether ours or whoever's, is I think it's only a kind of win-win because first of all, the rule will generally be something like no surprises, right? So if there is anything that they kind of slip up on, you can have a conversation about that. But equally, it's kind of should be good, and the feedback we've had is for some of the conversations that it's been very, very good in terms of their sort of recruitment, how they're perceived in the market, and actual tangible things have happened off the back of some of the conversations, put it that way. And just like I said, the kind of the brand and positioning in the market, and I think that is a very positive thing. And I think that if you can try and set the narrative a little bit more, sometimes it works in your favor as a law firm. Rather than people always sort of speculating about what's going on behind closed doors at X, Y, or Z firm, right? Which happens all the time in the legal media space, and you will know this very well. Most of the time, if you go and speak to the actual kind of leaders of a law firm or whoever it is, and you ask them about X, Y, or Z, sort of semi-scandalous bit of gossip or news, it's not quite how it might have been kind of covered or reported.
That can happen, I've heard. So what would be a couple of your favourite podcasts if you were pointing to people to ones that you think they really came together?
The one that comes to mind is we had Tom Goodhead, who was the former CEO and founder of Pogus Goodhead, the litigation boutique, who's leading the this £36 billion group action against BHP. Mm-hmm. And he was actually one of our early guests, but Tom is a lovely guy, and he was just super kind of transparent in terms of what he told us about how Bogus Goodhead came to be and how that case is being managed. I mean, I just thought it was such an interesting conversation.
Plenty to talk about in that case.
So go and listen to that one. Like I said, it's one of our early episodes, and it's super topical at the moment, isn't it? Because that case is now heading to the damages phase. So it's starting to get even more serious. And I think it was just last week that it came out that Quinn Emanuel has now been sort of drafted in to help with that. So that'll be very interesting to see. And then, speaking of Quinn Emanuel, we had John Quinn, so founder of Quinn Emanuel, or co-founder, I guess.
Big character.
A few months back, exactly. And you know what? He has a very kind of clear view on how he thinks the business of a law firm should be and operate. And I think it's quite refreshing to hear that from time to time, And one of the things he often says is about how important it is that your proposition to the market is very clear and differentiated. And for Quinn Emanuel, of course, they are disputes only. So that has given it, everyone in the market knows what Quinn Emanuel stands for. And I remember we were talking on the show about his views. I asked him about his views in relation to Herbert Smith Freehills. And that's one thing that he said. He said, maybe they did dilute their brand a little bit, 10, 15 years ago, when they're still the premier sort of dispute shop in London, aren't they? But they decided to sort of really double down on a kind of more full service strategy. If you remember, they went hard into Asia Pacific with the Freehills merger, etc. And who's to say which has been the more successful strategy? But I think you would say that these days, maybe when you think about who is the sort of disputes powerhouse, maybe you wouldn't necessarily as easily sort of point to Herbert Smith.
Okay, let's widen out a bit on the profession. I think it's pretty clear territory that Non-Billable looks at, the business of law, outside investment, law tech, in many guises. What are the most interesting trends that you see at the moment, and is there anything that you think should be getting more attention than it is?
Interesting trends. Well, good question, Alex. I mean, it's the boring one, but obviously it is the kind of private equity / external capital investing into law firms. I do think that is a very sort of interesting and sort of active one, and I think there will be something that happens within the next 12 to 24 months, probably among a sort of top 20 law firm. Ignoring
bullish on the market.
I'm just bullish because I speak to people who know about these things, and that's what they tell me, and I would back a lot of their views because they're very close to it. So I think something like that will happen. I don't DWF accepted, by the way, because it's a bit of an outlier, but something like that will happen. It probably won't be some sort of buyout in the traditional sense, but I would think some firm will probably take some external investment to do something quite specific with. And it might be, for example, we saw a few weeks back that Kirkland announced that partnership with Palantir to build its own AI sort of powered fund formation tool. It's funding that itself, but another firm might need to tap some sort of investor to do that. So I would say watch that space.
So your general feeling with AI in law, do you see it? I mean, it often sort of turns into two ends of the telescope, doesn't it? Is it going to be amazing? Is it going to take everybody into this enabled tech environment, or is it sort of dooming all the lawyers and all that kind of stuff? What gets talked about too much? What's overhyped in law?
What's overhyped in law? That's a good question, Alex. Maybe do you think compensation gets overhyped a little bit? Everyone likes reporting on compensation and the like, and maybe if you are a kind of junior lawyer, that's just the kind of market rate that is expected of you these days. I don't know. You see these junior lawyers' salaries just go up and up and up, and I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't know if it's kind of out of kilter or anything. So maybe that gets overhyped a little bit.
Yeah, I suppose it's reported because it drives a lot of interest and it drives a lot of profession. Whether that's a good thing or sustainable, or I mean, those are entirely separate things. the numbers keep going north. I don't think there's any doubt the sheer scale that firms like Kirkland and Latham have gotten to have changed the level of media attention on the industry beyond, defined industry press.
Yeah, it makes for a good story, don't get me wrong. And look, obviously the salaries are very, very high, aren't they? But I guess if you look at it on a kind of, inflation's ripped, hasn't it, over the past kind of 5 years in particular, but over the past 10 years as well. So, when I qualified, I won't tell you how much the pay was, but I'll tell you that now it's kind of, it's almost tripled. So that's probably outstripping inflation, to be fair.
I think there's a little bit of inflation. Yeah.
I would say that it's a good time.
I know that they were paying lawyers when you came through. I think you were hanging in there.
It's a good time to be a junior lawyer. That's for sure.
Okay. So if firms want to engage with non-billable, maybe ones that haven't had a chance or just haven't wanted to do it until now, what should they do? What's a good way to approach it?
Well, you can check out our website, obviously, which is non-billable.co.uk. Subscribe to our newsletter. That's what we were kind of originally known for. You can do that on the website. But then, do check out the podcast. So this is the Non-Billable podcast. We have episodes every week, every Tuesday. And let me know what you think. You can reach out to me. I'm Oliver at non-billable.co.uk.
And you're up to 3 staff full time at the moment, is it? Where are you on that?
Yeah, still sort of lean, small but mighty team. So we're 3 full time. So it's me, kind of editor, and I have 2 reporters working for me as well.
Yeah, Rachel and Amy, that's correct.
Rachel and Amy, and they both, similar sort of beats. We can't silo it particularly much, as you can expect. So, their details are on the website as well. So if you have any scoops, any tips, then feel free to reach out.
Okay, well, fine. We're getting towards the end. So what's in the future? How do you see? You're an open access title, as you've mentioned. I think one of the reasons why I was interested in what you've been doing is you appear to be trying to use that to the maximum. A lot of the titles have gone subscription. You're achieving, those are significant audience reach numbers by any yardstick. How does that evolve? What's the next step?
The sort of paywall discussion is an interesting one, isn't it? And I suppose it just depends on what you're optimizing for, doesn't it? I mean, if you're optimizing for kind of sticky, repeatable revenue, and you have an established kind of base, then the subscription model obviously makes sense. Okay, if you're optimizing for discoverability and reach, then that's not the smartest approach. So you need to be free to read and accessible to all. So at the moment we're optimizing for reach and discoverability, and that's why we're free to read. I don't know how that will play out in the future, to be honest with you. I'm not kind of religious about that necessarily. But the vision for non-billable looking forward is really to become, we want to become the kind of platform, the go-to platform for the modern big law industry, right? So we want to be with you from the time that you start investigating what's going on in the legal industry right through to when you're leading a law firm. So news, insights. There's other interesting kind of products and initiatives that are on our roadmap that are super exciting. But that's really what we want it to look like, and hopefully the kind of differentiator a little bit can be the kind of angle and insight that I bring to the table, really, just from having done it for a few years.
I'm sure, given your rapid ascent, there'll be plenty more to watch. I think that's pretty much it. Oliver, thank you for coming in. I've really enjoyed the discussion.
Okay, thanks, Alex.